Hi everyone, can you hear me? I guess I'm gonna wait maybe for a few more people to show up. Somebody let me know if you can hear me. Um, and then I know this is lunch hour for a lot of people, so I don't expect standing room only. Yay, thanks, Cynthia. Oh, I enjoyed your talk so much. You knocked me out 35 books. I I'm in awe. Hi, Nia. I think my wireless connection is good. I did a 2.5 hour interview the other day and another one an hour yesterday, and the connection was really good. So I think we'll be good today. Um, I'll tell everyone who's here thus far, I tend to get nervous on camera, even in the comfort of my own home. I'm in my dressing room. You can see my shoe shelf behind me. Um, and I still will get incredibly nervous. In fact, when my book came out in 2018, I actually not only had to take beta blockers before every interview, even if it was at some obscure radio show in some tiny town in the Midwest, from the comfort of my own home for 5 minutes. And I actually ended up getting some trauma therapy because I realized being in the spotlight is triggering for me. So that was an interesting experience when my book came out to be doing book promo at the same time I was getting intensive EMDR. I'm much less nervous these days, just a tiny bit. So, oh, and also I'm in Austin, Texas, where I don't get allergies much. Everyone else does, but it's so bad right now that even I'm getting a little. So I'm going to be clearing my throat here and there because that's how it affects me. So I'll get started here in a second. And feel free to just pepper those questions in as I'm talking, and I'm just going to tell you a little about myself and my writing journey, and then mostly the book, and I'll stop and answer questions as they come in. Cynthia, yeah, that's a new phrase for me. Sets me on my heels. I like that. I'm going to use it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. Let's see, who am I? Well, my name's Kristin Casey. I'm in Austin, Texas. I am the author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh, which is an addiction memoir. I call it a rock and roll addiction memoir. It is primarily about me. Obviously, it's a memoir. It's about my addictions, the worst of which were in my 20s. So it takes place in that 10-year period of my 20s. But 7 of those years, or most of the first 7, were spent with dating or living with or engaged to one of the greatest rock guitarists of all time, Joe Walsh, who many people know excuse me, mostly from the Eagles. He was one of the guitarists in the Eagles, or his early success in the James Gang, or his solo career, songs like Life's Been Good, Rocky Mountain Way, Life of Illusion, In the City. Boy, this is bad. I'm so sorry. So the book, Rock Monster, is the title, is a bit of a play on words. It was actually just a working title, but my publisher liked it a lot. I never intended for that to actually be the title. But it's a bit of a play on words. Joe's a rock star. I was a crack rock addict, among other things. I was an alcoholic, a crack addict, a speed freak. But Monster was our pet name for each other, and it basically meant like party animal. So he was a rock monster, I was a rock monster, and that's where the title came from. But the book essentially is more than anything about dependency, and I'll talk more about that later. My dependency on substances, obviously, it's an addiction memoir, but also my dependency on Joe, my codependency in that relationship, and my dependency on my identity as a rock star's girlfriend, and the identity that I was just beginning to embody at 20 when I met him, that of an independent, artistic, cerebral, somewhat rebellious, critically thinking feminist woman that just got chucked out the window when I had this option for an identity to really live in someone's shadow. And so I think the story sort of parallels a lot my dependency on all these different things, and it's an arc from dependency to a more self-determined life. So I'll tell some stories from the book too. I think an addiction memoir can be really kind of depressing, and certainly the latter third of the book is a bit harrowing, I've been told, and as I lived it. But there's, the life that I led with Joe, which is one of the reasons my addictions got so bad. It was like really quite glamorous and fun, and we were traveling around the world and hobnobbing with all kinds of celebrities, and so that's some of the funner stuff. And so those are some of the stories I guess I'll tell in a little bit. But back to who I am. So I live in Austin, Texas. I was raised in San Diego. I moved to Texas in high school, moved to Amarillo, and then as soon as I graduated, booked it to Austin for college to go to UT, and met Joe a few years later. And of course, he was living in LA. So after just sort of hitting the road with him for a few years, we eventually moved in together. And I lived in LA for a few years. And then when we split up, I moved to Vegas for 5 years. And all of this is detailed in the book. And then about 22 years ago, I moved back to Austin. And so this is my home. This has really been home since I moved here at 17. I just fell in love with this town. It's very nurturing for creatives. It's one of the places you can live where if you work a day job or a night job as a bartender so that you can spend all of your energy or all the rest of your energy writing or doing photography or whatever your creative aspirations are, people don't look at you crazy. They look up to you and they support you and they nurture you. And so I'm just really in love with this town. Let's see. Like I said, I got back to Austin about 22 years ago. I got sober 23 years ago in Vegas. And so I was stripping at the time. And while that was a career that I did in spurts throughout my life, and was at different times really a wonderful experience and a not so wonderful experience. At the time that I got sober, I continued to do it for a little while and then just realized it wasn't the most healthy place for me to be emotionally, and all that great money I was making was going to go to intensive therapy for the rest of my life. So I moved back to Austin in '98, and I got a straight job selling real estate, and just threw myself into recovery and started writing. And the reason I got into real estate instead of going back to school was actually because I thought, I'll be my own boss and I'll be able to structure my schedule so that I can write as much as I want, not really realizing that as a realtor, you're working 60 hours a week. And if you want to write, it's just going to be in the wee hours of the night, which is basically what I did. And so, and I was a little hesitant at first. I had just huge self-doubt. As far as fear of failure and all that. What I eventually started doing after my first few years of just workaholism, really completely, was realizing at some point I'm in the live music capital of the world, and that it really is my favorite thing to do. And so I started going out to see all kinds of bands and going dancing, but also going to see singer-songwriters and watching these amazing musicians who had some great songs and some songs that maybe were not so great put themselves out there on stage in front of live people. And I just thought it was so amazingly courageous that it really inspired me to finally start putting pen to paper. And so I really started writing in earnest, I would say in my early mid-30s. Up until that point, I was not what you would call like a functioning alcoholic. So I had written probably from my high school years to the time I got sober, no more than 3 short stories and a few poems, only half of which was, any good. But and once I started writing in my early 30s, there was a lot of good and not so good came out then too. But slowly over the years and through my 30s, I started getting published short stories here and there, probably half a dozen. And, I think my strength has always been memoir. My drive has always been to write personal essay and memoir. I've never read more of anything than memoir. I'm a memoir addict, and from my earliest, growing up, I read a lot of Nancy Drew, but even biographies. Like I remember we had a very small library in my elementary school, and there was a section of biographies of all these historical women, from Betsy Ross to Annie Oakley. And I read that whole collection of 10 or 20 biographies, like over and over again through those 8 years. And it was when I was 11 and I was reading Roald Dahl's book of short stories that has 2 personal essays at the end. It was those 2 stories at 11 years old that made me think I might want to be a writer, and Roald Dahl writes amazing fiction, and yet it was those personal essays at the end, but one about his boarding school experiences and one about how he became a writer and being a pilot in the war, or a gunner, I guess. I forget. And then 2 years later, I read The World According to Garp, which is fiction, I know, but that was the book that made me realize I definitely want to be a writer. And I think partly because, I thought it was an amazing book, and I still do. It was also a lot about the topics that I love to write about, which is relationships and feminist topics, and the sort of, I forget the way John Irving put it, but I think he saw the book as sort of a battle between the polarity of the sexes, I think is what he said. And to me, there's really no topic that's more fascinating. So basically what I write about really is all around that arena. I do, of course, write about addiction and dependency, and I feel like it's just a topic I know very well, and also when I feel I'm sort of duty bound to write about, because I think there's a lot of stigma and we need to meet the addict where they're at, and to do that we need a better map, and so I need to contribute to that map as somebody who's been through that jungle. But my areas of passion are really also around all things intimacy, attraction, chemistry, sexuality, and relationships. And so those are the topics that I write on more than anything. And so the short stories I was writing in my 30s, more than anything, I drew from my own life. Back in the day when I was 11, 12, 13, thinking I might want to be a writer, I never expected to have such a wild, adventurous life that would lend itself to memoir as well as it has. But, this story with Joe obviously sort of definitely lent itself to a book, and I've got a couple more memoirs in me for the events that took place afterward. Thank you. So interesting to hear about your passions. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really love to hear what writers are passionate about, but I think it also comes across the page. What else are you going to write about? It's going to be your best stuff, right? If you're writing about what you're passionate about. It certainly is the only thing I'm able to talk about on camera without getting really nervous. It's the only reason I'm able to talk, is because if I'm talking about something I'm passionate about, then I forget myself briefly. Let's see. So this thing with Joe, part of why I ended up writing about it, like we were together from 88 to 95. And the way I describe our relationship, and in fact, if you're going to sum up the book in one sentence, is this crazy, sexy cautionary tale about 2 addicts in love without a single relationship skill. And I work right now in the field of sexuality counseling. So, and this relationship was sort of my starting point, trying to figure out what went so awry. And there was so much to figure out there. And also as someone who was emotionally isolated as a child, and that led to my addictions. And then the 10 years in early sobriety, I was trying to figure out how to actually connect with people, because I had, after the devastating breakup and my entire loss of identity, this idea of getting close to people and maybe losing my identity again, especially if I fell in love, like that was so terrifying to me that this journey to overcome fear of intimacy in my 30s sort of what led to my work as an intimacy coach in the field of sexuality counseling. And so my next books are a lot about that, a lot about dating and intimacy, and just a little bit, they're probably going to be a lot funnier because of that, because I, again, made every mistake in the book. But where was I? So Joe and I met in 1988. He was 40, I was 20. I was living in Austin. I was stripping. I was working with my friend Vicky, who was dating his bass player. And so when the guys came through town for one of the gigs, they came through a couple times a year, I guess. She introduced us, and I didn't have any idea who he was. The name meant nothing to me. At 20, I'd been stripping for a couple years, so I was learning about classic rock, and I knew who the Eagles were, but the name Joe Walsh meant nothing to me. I had spent my teens listening to new wave and punk rock, and so I thought, well, I'll meet him. I'll be polite. It's a fix-up, and I figured he was some one-hit wonder from the 70s, and within 20 minutes of meeting him, I just felt completely head over heels in love, and literally heard a voice in my head, sort of that moment where the skies part, where, this voice said, "This is the man you're meant to marry." And that was it for me. And the next day I went to he invited me to the concert he was playing. And I was sort of on a cloud thinking, I've met the man I'm going to marry. And I go to the concert, and I am in the audience listening to these songs, and I recognize every single one. And I realize, oh my God, he's hugely famous. He's a genuine rock star. He's probably never going to call me. Last night was a one night stand, and I was completely devastated and went home and cried. And then he called me, and the rest is history. We ended up over the next few months becoming a couple. At the time, I had overcome a meth addiction. Started at 17, ended at 18. It was a short meth addiction, but I knew that I had a real problem with drugs. I was also working in a strip club. I'd had a drinking problem from high school, and I was drinking every night for free. So I was surrounded in an atmosphere where drinking was sort of socially accepted. But, even at 20, I had a bigger problem than almost anyone else in the club. So Joe was a high-functioning cocaine addict and alcoholic, and so I did my best early in the relationship to not partake. That didn't last all that long. And so I started using Coke within a few months of us becoming serious. And then it fairly quickly spiraled until when I moved in with him, the year I moved in with him, which was 91, my addictions probably outpaced his at that point. And if you know anything about Joe Walsh's Coke addictions and the stories about him, I mean, they're legendary. I mean, he was the guy with the chainsawing hotel rooms to bits, like the classic sort of out of control rock star. And yet my cocaine use was really the bigger problem by then. And so the next few years together were just a mix of world travel, hobnobbing with celebrities, being crazy in love, fighting viciously. I mean, like coming to blows. Like I beat him up once. I mean, I was a 115-pound Coke addict, so I didn't do much damage. And then one time, he got violent with me. And eventually, we broke up before either of us got sober. And I moved to Las Vegas and started stripping again, and spiraling really, really badly with alcohol. And then deciding when we broke up for good, my life had no meaning, my identity had no substance. Without Joe, I was nothing, and decided I was just going to drink myself to death because I figured I was halfway there. And so towards the end of the book, I get into that. There was a 2-year spiral, and it was really a state of severe mental illness. I mean, if we're going to call it what it was. And then at what could have been the last minute, the day that I got so sick that I really did think I might die, I had sort of a spiritual experience, and I went another direction, obviously, and here I am, and I've been sober ever since. My next book will be a lot about sobriety. So this book was 10 years of how I got to how I hit my bottom, and a couple chapters, or maybe a chapter on how I got out of that. And then the next book will be a lot about what it was like trying to readjust to society and connect and make friends and date and build a life in sobriety. And so I guess, where are we at? 11:20. So let me show you the books. This is the paperback, which just came out, I think 2 weeks ago. And I'm so pleased that my publisher decided to put some pictures in there, because when I asked him, when we first met, I got the book deal and flew out to LA to meet Tyson Cornell from Rare Bird Books, who, by the way, is just the best publisher I could have ever asked for. We sat down and had lunch, and I just asked him if he thought this would be a book he could put pictures in. He said, yeah, maybe. And when I started sending him the pictures right before it went to print, I was like, do you want to consider any of these? And he just got very excited, and he put every single one in there that I sent him. So this is just me and Joe, but there's some of the celebrities in here. There's Stevie Nicks and Joe down there. There's, let's see, thought I had one of Ringo Starr in here, but I can't find it. Oh, there's Clarence Clemens. This is one of my favorites. Clarence Clemens from the E Street Band. And then, oh, that's a favorite one of me and Joe. This is the hardback. It came out 2 years ago. There's a bunch of pictures on the back. That is my grandmother sitting on my boyfriend's lap there. I'll go ahead and take any questions if you guys want to shoot them out. I know I've kind of bounced all around. And until I start seeing some questions I can answer, I'll tell you some stories about the book. I'll tell you my very favorite story, and then a story that sort of counterbalances it, that was one of my least favorite experiences. And the reason I chose these stories to tell is because they're about celebrity women, about two sort of iconic rock star women, one being Stevie Nicks, and that was a great experience, meeting her. And then the other being Bonnie Raitt, which was a less than great experience. But I just think it's kind of telling. Stevie and Joe used to date, which I learned shortly after he and I got together. I think it was our first Christmas together. He started giving me all these clothes, these sort of gypsy, beautiful flapper dress, and a couple flapper dresses, and a lace, gorgeous peasant dress. And he told me they used to be Stevie's. And of course, I was a huge Stevie Nicks fan growing up, so I was just like completely knocked out. Like, Stevie Nicks' wardrobe was my dream vacation, just like going through her wardrobe. And now I had these 3 dresses from her. So a few years later, we're living together, and Stevie's in town in LA, and she invites Joe to dinner, and he says, well, I'm living with someone now. And she says, well, bring her. And I was so excited. We were going to dinner that night with the goddess herself. I mean, I just couldn't have been more excited. And then one of Joe's friends tells me, well, she's probably nervous about meeting you, because she's still in love with Joe, always has been. And I had no idea, but I just thought it was so classy of her to invite me to dinner, considering she was still in love with him. And so we went to dinner with her, and she was nervous. It was so sweet, but she could not have been more lovely. And so we had a lovely dinner. She had a pendant stuck in her hair, and I very, very carefully got it out for her, just not wanting to damage a single hair on the goddess's head. And then she gave it to me. I still have it. And then we went to our house afterwards. And around this point, we all pile in the car and go back to our place in Studio City. I'm noticing that like Stevie's getting a little bit more out there, a little bit more scattered, really, really chatty. And that just kind of continues on for the rest of the night. So it's like me and Joe and Stevie and maybe 4 or 5 of our friends hanging out in our house in Studio City. And all the girls are kind of gathered over here with Stevie. And she's just sort of holding court and just rambling. And it's getting more out there and more out there. And the rest of us are like exchanging looks. And then Stevie gets up and goes upstairs and starts playing the grand piano. And at this point, it's like 4:30 in the morning. And God love her, Joe and I wanted to go to bed. It was one of the nights we actually went to bed before sunrise. And so, he pulls me aside and he's like, I can't, I keep dropping hints. She won't leave. You have to do something. So I sit down and I tell Stevie how lovely it had been to meet her, and thanks for inviting me to dinner. And Joe and I are going to go to bed now. And thanks again. And hope to see her again soon. And she's like, oh, it was lovely to meet you too. And then she continues to play, like completely oblivious to the fact that she's the guest that wouldn't leave. And it was the funniest moment. And finally, one of my friends said, her limo driver's out there in your driveway waiting for her. So I went out there and we kind of concocted a plan to kind of get her outside, come up with a ruse to get her to go outside, like to show her something in the stars or whatever. And as soon as we got her outside, like Joe pulls me back and closes the door as the limo driver kind of shoves her in the limo as the sun is coming up. But it was still one of the funnest nights of my life. She's just a delight. And I think that it comes across in the book that I just adore her, and I just found it amusing more than anything. The other story, what does Joe think of the book? I would love to know. That is a very good question. I tried to reach him when I decided to write the book, because I always knew I had this story that was pretty commercial, but I had never intended to write it. And part of that was out of loyalty. I mean, I just thought it's too private. And then I realized that my relationship with Joe and my story of addiction are the two most potent influences on who I became as a person, both good and bad, I would say. And as a memoirist, for me to not write that story would be a lot like a fish refusing to swim for fear of upsetting a whale on the other side of the ocean, So I just decided I was going to write it as respectfully as I could, and I certainly didn't give away all our secrets, and everything that I shared, I thought really served the story. And it was every time I wrote and every time I edited, I asked myself that question over and over and over again. Does this serve the story? Does this serve the story of addiction and dependency that you need to tell to contribute to the collective intelligence on this particular mental illness? And I also did want to pull back the curtain on what it's like to live with a celebrity and what it's like to live with a celebrity who's basically is just worshipped completely and presumed to never do anything wrong. I don't think that celebrity worship is good for anyone, not the fans, not the partners of the celebrity, certainly the families of the celebrity, and not for the celebrity themselves. And so that was one of the reasons I wrote this book as well. I really felt like I wanted to humanize. I wanted to tell the truth of because celebrities wouldn't. I love Joe, I really do. But I don't think he would have gotten away with a lot of the stuff he got away with had he not been on such a pedestal. So anyway, we remained friends. In fact, we even talked about dating again the last time we saw each other in 2006. And then I fell in love shortly thereafter. And then when that relationship ended, Joe had just met the woman he's now married to. So our timing was just off. But we stayed friends. We talked every now and then. I saw him whenever he came through Texas. And then when I decided to write the book, I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years. Hadn't heard back. I'd sent him a couple of emails, hadn't heard back. I think once he got married, he stopped. I don't think he was in contact with any of his ex-girlfriends after he got married for obvious reasons. And so I tried to contact him. I tried to email him, call him. I never heard back. I finally, I decided, well, I'll write the book and then I'll try again. And so before the book came out, I tried to reach him through his manager, his road manager. And he promised to get a message to him, but I never heard back. And so I have heard through the grapevine that when he heard my book was coming out, he got very scared. He was very, very nervous. Nobody's told me what he thought about it. And I will tell you what my assumption is. My assumption is that he probably wishes I hadn't written it. That he probably is relieved I didn't tell everything. A little relieved. I hope that he enjoyed sort of going down memory lane a little bit. I hope that he maybe learned some things about what it was like from my experience. I hope that he liked some of it. My assumption is he probably did, and he also probably didn't like some of it. Joe's a very private person, I think. but at this point, I also don't think that it did any damage. He's a very established rock star, and there's, I wouldn't have written it if I thought it would have done any damage to his life. When I see interviews with Joe, he seems very down to earth and a truly nice guy. Yes. I will tell you, Joe is one of the most special people I've ever met. I have never met anyone like him, and I don't just say that because he was the love of my life. Almost anyone who knows him will tell you the same thing. He's a really unique individual. He's an incredibly sensitive person, more sensitive than I think it comes across, but I don't think anyone realizes how sensitive he is. And he's been through hell. He lost his father. He lost a daughter, a 4-year-old daughter. I mean, he's been through hell. He's been through a lot of trauma. Joe is very caring. He was a wonderful boyfriend in so many ways. I think he's very self-protective. So, and I think he finds it stressful. Things may have changed recently, but I would say they have changed. In the interviews I see him in now, he seems a little less guarded. But Joe is, this clown prince of rock and roll persona of his, I quickly came to realize was a way of deflecting attention versus trying to get attention. I think that Joe just, back when I was with him, I think he had some insecurities, but also he was kind of a shy guy, an introverted guy. He's an artist, and he's just a very sensitive guy. But he's brilliant in his way, and he's incredibly loving and unbelievably romantic and sweet and silly and boyish as can be, and just got one of the biggest hearts. I mean, he's just a really, really good guy. Yeah. And down to earth. I mean, I think if he trusts a person, if he feels comfortable with a person, he's very, very down to earth. And if he doesn't, he's very, very guarded. Oh, thank you. You look forward. Yeah. I really hope you enjoy the book. I don't think I have much time, maybe a couple of minutes. I think I go to 12:35, or maybe it's 12:30. Regardless, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all for coming. You can get the book, by the way, anywhere books are sold, on Amazon, and Book People in Austin is my favorite local bookstore, and they have some autographed copies. And my website is KristinCasey.com. You can learn more about, and there's tons of pictures, by the way, all the best pictures from those years of Joe and me and a bunch of celebrities, including Ringo. And oh, I never did tell the Bonnie Raitt story. Well, you have to read the book, and I think most people are surprised. It was an interesting episode, but now you have to read the book. But KristinCasey.com, there's a whole page of nothing but pictures of my years with Joe on there, and also my Facebook page. I've put them all there, and my Instagram as well. So anyway, thanks everyone.